We are back from our break, and we are in Chapter 5. We're working on page 69. We just completed, just to refresh your memory, taking an article, instantiating it, putting some contents into it, and then doing the article.save to write it back to the database, and then verifying that the data got there. The next command that we are going to type is we're going to type this one here, which says article.count. Now notice a difference here. Capital A, this tells us that we're interacting with the model, which interacts directly with the database. Okay, so we're not interacting with the lowercase a, which is the instantiated data. We're interacting directly with the database. So it's going back to the database and asking for a count of how many articles. Now I know, because we were looking physically at the database, right? The book says it's got 1 record, right? But I've got 3, because I do have 3. Notice once again, because we are interfacing directly with the database via the model, the class, which is the model, it is doing a SQL command, and it's just going select count star from articles. So it's writing the SQL for us and doing the work and pulling it back. Now if I type in the command lowercase a and ask it if it's a new record, it's a question mark, it says false because it is no longer a new record. It does the one that's sitting in memory, not the one that's signed to the database, the one that's still sitting in memory, that still exists. Is it a new record? No, it's not. It has stuff in it. All right. Let's go ahead now and start typing the following commands that come at the bottom of the page here. So what the guy wants us to do is type article again, and yes, by instantiating a new one, it will overwrite the one that's currently sitting in memory.
Do we have an assignment due today?
We do not have an assignment due today.
Midterm due tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a good point. For those of you that are here for fall of 2017, the midterm, by the time the people watch the video, your midterm's already due. You're late. The midterm, if you guys aren't aware of it, there is a midterm exam in the exams folder. It needs to be completed by midnight tomorrow if you want it to be included in your midterm grade.
Tomorrow, not tonight.
Not tonight. It is due tomorrow at midnight.
Oh, I thought you were...
All right, so our next step
yakking it up.
is basically to instantiate a fresh article.
Trying to apply some hot takes.
Okay, so you hear my students bleeding into the mic, please excuse them and their ill behavior and humor, or lack thereof. Okay, so once again, we do have that pre-existing variable that holds an object called article, but now we're instantiating a new article inside that same variable. I could use a different name, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to article.new stored in article. Press enter. Once again, we get the same response, all nils. And then we're going to go once again and repeat the same command. So we're going to say article.title equals whatever you want to call it, intro to SQL. Notice this time we're using double quotes, same difference. Article.body equals, and here's where I'm going to copy paste. And we'll do article.published@. Equals, now this time instead of hard coding a date, notice that we're going to run a method. We're going to run date.today. And then finally we'll do article.save. So it's going to take all the stuff that's attached to the object that we instantiated in memory and now is committing it into the database. Active record maps all the object components that we instantiated, converts it into a SQL statement. SQL statement interacts with the database and stores the information. And of course, we can verify that it made it there. And this is really not a necessary step, but it's kind of a peace of mind thing. Just having this tool sitting there where I can just look at it and make sure that it did get there. So now we have that one added as well. Now, what we've learned so far is one approach to doing it. And basically what we're doing is we're taking all the columns and onesie, twosie, applying values to them, right? Well, it is possible to use a more concise syntax and do all that work all at once. So what I'm going to do with this next one is I'm going to copy this whole line, and before I hit paste, and I'm trying to warn you guys here, because whenever we have commands in the book, if we're copy pasting them, like I'm doing a copy right now, we always want to use a text editor to buffer it, because you notice that really that ended up being 2 lines, and if I put it in the console, it's going to split it when I hit enter. It's not going to put the whole thing in. So I'm going to come here to the end of the first line, add a space, and delete. So now you can see it's all in one line. So I'm going to make sure that's all highlighted and copy it, and then I'm going to come over to the prompt and paste it in. Now if you look what we're doing here syntax-wise, and I'm going to refer to the book, we're still doing article.new. Yes, we're using the same variable again. And now we're using a syntax, and you guys saw this syntax last week, was it? Right? So we're saying the title, the body, and published at, and we're doing it all in one fell swoop. And I'm going to press enter. I'm going to go back to the prompt, press enter. I know it worked because it spit it all back to me. And then I'm just going to issue an article.save. And that's been placed in the database now as well. And let's go back and do a refresh and just double check. So same concept, different approach. Instead of typing several different command lines and individually entering each one, we have a method for doing them all in one fell swoop. So that can be pretty useful too. And chances are, if you're writing your application, you can have the application handle it very much in that way, where it would do it all in one fell swoop. So for example, right now we are manually interacting with the database, so you can see how it works. But when we're running a full-blown application, like the blog application, what's going to happen is you'll allow the application itself to take care of all this stuff in the background. You wouldn't do any of this manually, but in order for you to understand how it works, that's why we're doing this. All right, let's go back to the book. All right. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use a new method called the create method. And here's where we start mapping it back to that whole CRUD concept. Because what we have been doing thus far is we've been instantiating an object, right? And then at first onesie twosie applying data to each column, and then discovering a way to do it all in one fell swoop, but it doesn't write back to the database until we do article.save. Is there an easier way? Why, yes there is. And that one's called create. So that's what you're seeing here in the next example. And here we're going to be doing exactly the same thing. So I'm going to copy this. Once again, I'm going to my text editor and I'm pasting it in just to eliminate 2 separate lines. So now we can see it's all one line. Control A, select all, Control C to copy. Back over to the prompt, and I'm going to paste it in. I'm not going to hit enter quite yet, but the difference here is the create method, like the previous thing that we just did, allows us to assign values to multiple fields at the same time and save it to the database with one command. I like it. Very efficient. Once again, we can go to the database tool and see that it actually added to the database. So that's the create method. And it's a nice, efficient little way to instantiate and save right back to the database all in one fell swoop. All right. Now, if you look at the output of a command, and let's bring up the command prompt again real quick and just look at how it handled it. So we had, let's find my prompt here. So we did our create command. We had the column names and the text, all that stuff. We pressed enter, and then it committed it all into the database. And then the result of the transaction, it showed us what was in the database. Now, if at the prompt we type the next command, which is attributes, and actually there's a whole bunch of text here, so why don't we just copy paste it. The book is pointing out, and I'm seeing this as I'm doing the copy paste, that we are, in essence, instead of sending things onesie-twosie, we are, in essence, sending a hash to the database. The way that we know that in this language or with these tools is the fact that we're working with the curly brackets. That's kind of our indicator there. And really, it's kind of a, very similar to kind of the JSON format in JavaScript, if you guys remember that. But this command, now that I've made it all on one line, attributes, you should recognize that attributes as a keyword here is basically a variable, right? And on the right side of the equal sign, we're passing to it a hash, and it might be easier to see here in the book. So we have the title, the body, the published at, and then when I press enter, it's going to show me what it placed into that variable. Now, as a follow-up to that, I can pass directly to the model using the create method, and then I can take that variable that I just created, attributes, and pass it in, and really what I'm passing in is that hash that was just created. See this little section here, the curly brackets are getting passed as an argument to the create method, which directly interfaces with the database and writes it. And that's why you see, after I've typed this command here, the database transaction, and then a response from the console indicating that it did successfully write. Of course, we can go in and just verify that it really did work. All right. So just to clarify what we're doing here, we're showing multiple ways of doing the same thing. And that's possible in many languages, right? Now, the hope is that when you encounter code, you don't get bedazzled by what's going on. There's reasons why we do it one way or the other. If we're working at a prompt and we're manually adding a couple of things, we're manually adding a couple of things. But remember, when we're running an application, we are going to program, or we're going to programmatically control the application to do some of this stuff in the background, and we want to find efficient ways to do it. So one thing that might happen is you might have a form, and when you hit that submit button, it grabs all the form elements, key value pairs, puts it in a hash, sends it to a method, passes the variable in, and writes it to the database. It really is the most efficient way on the back end to do it. So what they're doing is they're kind of slowly building up and showing you what's happening. That's what's happening here. Now, if you're reading it on your own without some guidance, you might not see that very clearly initially. but I'm hoping that that helps. All right. We want to do an article.count just to do the token thing. He's going to have 5. We're going to have a couple more than that, obviously, because I had a couple in there beforehand. I have 7.
So article is the class you created inside your application?
No, well, article, actually the direct connection to the database. So article being the class that instantiates,
Yeah.
so that's really kind of our conduit directly to the database.
Okay.
It's the code model for the database table. So when I say article.count, it pulls up a method that interacts directly with the database. That's why it runs the SQL command, pulls back the information, and displays the count.
Okay. Yeah, I'll just ask you to see you start.
All right, so we've basically completed all the steps now up through page 70, and now we're moving on. So you found a few different ways now to get stuff into the database, which is very helpful to know all those different approaches. All right, the next topic that we are dealing with is using the search capabilities that we have available to us. So let's take a look at the 4 different ways that we can use find. So we can actually find things individually by using their ID. We can also look for all the records, or the first and the last, and these are just tools that are built in, so that makes it nice and simple. Those are all methods that we have. All right, so the first example that we're going to try is article.find. Now, I do want to preface this by saying that I know that I have more articles in my database than the author does. So when I say find 3, I'm actually going to type in find 5 to pull back the same information, right? Because I already had 2 things in there beforehand, right? And I still pulled up the wrong record. But either way, the point isn't to pull up the same thing he's pulling up. The point is that you can pull up whatever's got the ID of 5. So when I say article dot find 5, I'm passing in the parameter that's looking for the ID of 5. And if I go to my SQLite browser and I look at 5, sure enough, there's intro to SQL. And that's what it pulled back. That's a pretty simple little method, but pretty useful. All right. And pulled back all the info, displayed it on the screen for us. Now let's take it a step further. And in this case, now we're going to take that variable article and we're going to apply to it the results of the find. So we're going to take the method and run it. And I'm going to run the same number again. So it's going to take those results, the same ones that you see that spit back to the screen here, and then it's going to store it in an article. So the beauty of that is that now that it's stored in article, I can look at article and all of its properties or all of its fields. So if I type article.id, of course it's going to pull back 5. Because now that's stored in a variable. It's basically been instantiated. And it exists there inside that variable for us to extract information from. And if I say article.title, it will pull back that information. All right. Now, he does a little example here, and this is something actually you guys don't need to type in, but I'll type it in just to demonstrate, where he does article find, and he puts in a space and 1037, right? And it's throwing an error. And basically what this is doing, folks, is it's indicating that there's an error in how you're coding it. So how do you set things up so that in other languages, so that if you have an errant interaction with your database, do you guys remember? And you guys are all giving me like strange looks. But in Java, yeah, the try-catch is exactly what we're talking about. It's very standard if you're working in an object-oriented language like Java. And we experienced this in the Java 2 class, and some of you I know are taking that right now. But you'll get to a point in that class where you're doing database interactions. And whenever you're doing a database interaction with Java, where you can write SQL code directly inside of Java, you always need to have exception handlers whenever you're dealing with stuff that could break the interaction and make your application crash. So Ruby has a way to deal with that, and notice what their approach is. So instead of try catch, they're using a begin and rescue. So what they're saying, right, and really that example that we just typed here, I think they have a typo in the book. They probably meant to do this, right? And it really doesn't matter what number it is. I know I don't have something with an ID of 107. What they're showing here is that you can actually put in a rescue so that you don't get an errant message like this. Now remember, we're working at the prompt right now, but we have to think about the application that the users are going to see through their browser. The last thing you want a user to see is like, some weird, no method error, undefined method, blah, 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 blah. What do they care, right? They want a more user-friendly message. And when you do a try-catch in a traditional programming language, or in this case you do a begin rescue, the rescue gives you a way to throw something out there that won't crash the application and halt things in their tracks. So that's an approach that you can use to do that. All right, let's try a few more examples here before we adjourn for the day. And this one's pretty intuitive, so we're going to do article.first, not fist, first. And of course, that's going to go to our database and pull back the first article. Now, you're probably noticing that here he's got an article with an ID of 1, and it's named Rails Conf, but I know that in my database, I don't have one with an ID of 1 because I had deleted it last time when we were playing with like the CRUD tools. And my first couple of entries really are kind of nonsensical, right? Now, frankly, I could come in here and do what I'm doing right now. Are you guys watching what I'm doing? I'm actually deleting stuff from my database. And I could also come in here and I could actually edit these numbers in the SQLite browser. And now all my stuff's going to match. Isn't that interesting? But
so instead of it deleting in Rails, you can actually delete here? Is what you're saying?
yeah, I can.
Oh, well that makes a couple pages later a lot easier.
Now, the one little catch though is whenever you make changes here in this tool, make sure you hit this button. Write changes, because nothing will store until you hit that button.
Okay.
All right. So now if I run that, come back here and I up arrow and run that same command, I'm going to get the same thing that he has. So now I'm in sync with him. So that's handy to know as well. Let's try article.first. So I'm going to up arrow, backspace, and just type last. So of course that'll find the fifth one, and it should match up with what he has in the book. Moving on, we are now going to create a new variable. Notice it's not article, it's articles, plural, because what I'm doing is I'm going to run a different method called all, which guess what that does? It grabs all the articles and stores them in that one variable. Now, from a conceptual standpoint, that's pretty darn powerful. Because I'm basically taking a whole database table and throwing it into a variable. And then once it's in the variable, I also have the capability to grab any of the stuff that's attached to any one of the little records that we pulled out, as long as I use the right syntax. And if you look here, he's kind of got this output And I just want you to very carefully look at this. There are some differences with how the output happens now. The older versions, the output would start with square brackets. In the newer version, that square bracket is no longer visible. And it just goes directly to the hash mark, and then inside brackets, left and right brackets, it then has a kind of like a secondary layer here before it gets to that square bracket. So you see where the square bracket starts now? See where my mouse is? So we're getting a little bit different looking output than what the book has, but remember, we're dealing with a different version of Rails and a different version of Ruby. So both of those technologies have updated. But each one of those does have the complete contents of each one of the articles in the database. So this is really kind of like a dump as a string into a variable of the whole darn database table. That's kind of cool, really. Now, interestingly, notice the next command that he types. It says articles, lowercase a, the plural. And if I type class to see what the class is for this, and this is something that changed too between versions. Notice in the previous version, this was actually dealt with as an array. But now they're telling us that obviously the product has changed, but we're seeing that there's a different type of object that they're referring to. In the old version, it was an array. The language has upgraded. So we're seeing this as actually an active record component that's happening. This is not a mistake. This is just what the newer version does. Okay. If I now say articles.size, it should give me back 5. Now, this next command, I'm going to be running this a little pensively, right? Because here in the book, it was an array, right? And the syntax that I'm using right now, when I'm interfacing with an array, typically if I'm pulling back position 0, it should pull back the first record, right? So I'm pensively pressing that button, thinking, oh my God, it's not going to work, but actually it does work. So really, that object, even though it didn't say array on the screen, we really can deal with it as an array because it does have distinct entities within it. So that articles variable holds the whole database. The stuff is broken down into chunks that we can individually address. So now I've identified the first entry, which is in position 0, but has an ID of 1. And I was able to invoke that and pull it up to the screen by just saying articles square brackets 0. Now,
chapter 5.
This is chapter 5, and we are on page 73. So the next example, we're going to leave that 0 in there, and then we're going to add dot title, and of course that's going to find the title from that particular entry. And of course we can apply all these different methods that we've already learned like this. So articles first, dot title, and you see what we really have going on here is we're seeing that this dot syntax, very much like a language like jQuery does, we have the ability to chain methods. That's what's happening here. So now we're saying the articles dot first defines the first article and then the title. Next thing we're going to do is articles dot each. Wait, that's got a whole lot more in there. I better copy paste this. I don't want to make a mistake with all those pipes and curly brackets. So I'm going to grab this whole line. Or is it, wait, hold on a second. Is it all of this?
No, it's not. I can tell you right now it's not. It's just
Okay.
the part.
It's just the first part. So I'm going to paste the first part.
And then it shows all.
Right. What is puts again? It's kind of like an echo or a right line. right? So it's going to display to the screen. And what does it say? Articles.each. What does this imply? All right, so at this point we got the command typed in. And just remember, when we are doing the articles.each, that really kind of refers to a for each type of loop. So it's going to basically step through each one of the articles that are in there. And then for each article, we'll put out to the screen or echo to the screen article.title. So when I press enter, it did exactly that. So it said RailsConf, intro to SQL, blah, blah, blah. Listed them all to the screen. Now, it also spit out the entire contents of what's in memory, but that's just, Ruby's way of saying, this is what I'm working with.
Ruby echoes everything out
It does,
by default.
by default. Now you can see we're getting to this bottom of page 74 here, and I do have some comments. And this is, I'll tell you what, the very first time we went through this book and we tried putting in this line and we just kept failing and failing and failing and failing. And with the old versions of Ruby, that whole command worked. But here's the problem. We're going to do another basically for each loop here to get this information. But we don't want to enter the dates and the times at the end, because what's going on is we don't have those same dates and times in our database. So trying to run those and grab that information very simply is not going to work. I'm trying to copy paste this, but my mouse is not cooperating. All right, it looks like I have to manually type a curly bracket at the end. So that's not a big deal. I'll do that. And let's press enter. And then what this does is it will output all the dates and times. And then notice, really, this part here is really part of the output. And I'm not really sure why they displayed it the way they did. But what we're doing is going through each of the articles, outputting for each one when it was published. That's pretty simple there. Let's try the next one. And I promise we're almost done. But those two commands there are highlighted because most people, what they would do is try to type in all this stuff, and that's not what you want to do. Just up through the curly bracket. Oh, and here, of course, I failed with the command, right? Because really, what were we supposed to do here? Here's where we're actually passing in some parameters. And folks, all right, I'm going to backtrack. When we typed in the command in yellow, we should have first typed in this command. And if you know your SQL statements, and I'm actually operating on this one right here, we are actually ordering the articles based on the published at descending. Right? So in reverse order, so we're ordering them, and you can see the conversion to SQL right here, and then if I up arrow twice, it'll show it in reverse published date. All right, folks, we're past the end of class here already, but I do want to finish this section before we adjourn for the night. So the next commands that we're going to do is we're actually going to demonstrate the fact that we can put in some more SQL-like type of commands here. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to type in a command that says article.where title is RailsConf. So we know we have one like that, and we want the first instance of it. And indeed it goes out, it finds that first article with that title and brings it back to us. We can also issue an all command. So if we happen to have multiple articles with that same title, and you can see I copy pasted a little bit too much here. Well, I'm actually going to let it break there. So I typed in end because I was stuck at the prompt, but I copy pasted too much. But the last couple of commands, I do want to put those in so those of you following along at home can have all of them there. So it's looking for all the articles that have that title. Of course, there's only one, but if there were multiple ones, it would bring back all of them. And then finally, we can do a search for one that's got a title that doesn't exist. And of course, that will basically give us nothing. Notice the output looks a little different than the book. In the old version, it would just empty brackets, square brackets, and in this case, it actually puts out the whole active record indicator. All right, so we are done up through the midsection of page 75, and that's a good stopping point because when we resume next time, we'll be basically working with a fresh set of data. So we'll be grabbing a new article to put into the variable. So this is where we're going to pick up next time, and I will see you guys next week.